hook up the alternator. Wow. Okay, unhook it. Customer complaint confirmed. That's crazy. I've never seen this before on any vehicle. Hi everyone, welcome back to Pine Hollow Auto Diagnostics. Today we have a really weird car. It's a Subaru 2005 Legacy Turbo with 82,000 miles. Towed from a shop in Philadelphia, about 3 hours away. So again, interesting history of this car. So the shop owner's son bought this thing from a customer who didn't want to put any more money into it. Apparently no one could figure it out. Parts can has been fired, so now it's his. They couldn't figure it out either. What does it do? Well, the previous owner said probably needs head gaskets. It was diagnosed somewhere else. Runs like garbage. Okay, so they decided to do a compression check, the leak down test. Everything actually looked okay, engine mechanical. They fired it up, and it ran actually pretty well. So they're like, what the heck? How's it running so nicely now? And then they realized that once you connect the alternator, it runs like garbage. It barely stays running. So they're like, oh, it must be the alternator. So they put in an aftermarket AutoZone alternator. No change at all. It runs like garbage with the alternator hooked up. So let's fire it up. And they said this connector right here, if you leave it unplugged, it runs fine. It runs smooth. Obviously it doesn't charge. Once you hook that up, well, you'll see in a second. Another note was it has a parasitic battery drain, and the owner tells me that if you pull out a fuse, this 15 amp B unit B plus, that 15 amp fuse right there, the draw apparently goes away. So that's the information I have. Let's start it up. By the way, he said they replaced the engine computer with a junkyard one. Again, no difference. And apparently this one's not original either. So, like I said, this car has a long history. So let's fire it up. Okay. Sounds just normal. Sounds fine. Hook up the alternator. Wow. Okay, unhook it. Customer complaint confirmed. That's crazy. I've never seen this before on any vehicle. Let's scan it for codes. Just, you know, get that out of the way, health report. And then look up a wiring diagram and see what this charging system is, how it's laid out. But what the heck is going on with this Subaru? Alright, we're inside my office here. So full code scan. Yeah, cylinder 2 and 3 misfire detected. Communication circuit. Battery power supply malfunction. Okay, fine. Not too interesting. Pull up some service info on ALLDATA. And here's our charging system description. So alternator, there's the regulator, there's the main battery positive cable, and 2 terminals L and S. So we need a wiring diagram. Here it is, charging circuit. So there's our alternators. So there's the fat cable, and then 1, 2, 3 on 3 wires on the control circuit. And it says this is for a 3-liter. That's not what we have, so we should only have 2 wires, I guess. One of them goes to a fuse, hot at all times, 7.5 amp. Fuse 16 in the main fuse box, engine side, you know, under the hood. And then there's our charge warning light, black and white wire. So let's pull up the OE diagram, make sure we don't have this third wire on there. This is a pretty simple schematic. It's not computer controlled. I guess on the 6-cylinder it might be, but it shouldn't have anything to do with the computer. So why is it running really poorly? My gut feeling says, is there a massive ripple coming out of this aftermarket alternator? Perhaps. We'll get the scope out, see what happens when we plug in that connector while it's running. Pretty crazy stuff. Alright, so with the key on, test light to battery ground, you can see it's a dim light on the black and white wire, which is for the battery warning light. There's the battery warning light right there. If we take the test light away, that battery warning light should disappear. Indeed it does. And then the middle pin, we should have a bright light, power at all times. Yes, that's there. Next check is, let's put a scope right on this post right here. Okay, so scope, just one channel hooked up to the battery positive post, negatives on the negative battery terminal. We're at 12 volts right now, nice and steady. Let's run it, connect that connector, and see what happens to our main system voltage. Let's see. Ready? Let me rev it up a little bit. System voltage did go up. Seems like it's only running on 2 cylinders. And unhook it. Nice and smooth. Alright. Okay, so the alternator seems to be doing what it's supposed to. There's no excessive, ripple or anything. So you can measure the highs and the lows here. About 15 volts. That should 14.3. Let's go to the next screen. This is where I revved it up. I mean, the engine's running really poorly, keep in mind, so the voltage could fluctuate a little bit, but it's not going above 15, about 14.5 volts. No excessive noise or spikes or anything. Like right here, it looks pretty smooth, doesn't it? Where it runs really poorly, it'll, the RPMs drop, so the alternator output is also dropping. That's not a diode going bad or a severe ripple or something. So what is the next step in the diagnosis? We figure out what's going on with the input for the fuel injection and ignition systems. So the crankshaft position sensor lives right under the alternator, right here. Now we didn't have a code for crankshaft position sensor or anything like that, but we have access to the engine computer right here by the passenger's feet. So I want to measure that, and maybe a ramp of the ignition coils. If we see 4 even humps, then it's running smoothly. If it's all over the place, we'll see if something's being interrupted, possibly from a messed up crankshaft position sensor signal. So that'll be my next check. Right, ready for the next experiment. Picoscope's hooked up 3 channels. So channel 1 and 2 I have on the crankshaft position sensor wires. So this is a 2-wire CKP. I guess it's a variable reluctance. You should see it like a sine wave. And both of these wires go to the ECM. So I have channel 1 on the orange wire, B10, channel 2 on the yellow wire, B22. So they're right there at the engine computer. Third channel is an amp clamp on the fuse that feeds the ignition coils And that is, you have 4 ignition coils, and the power feed comes from fuse 12 15 amp. So I want to see when we start the car with the alternator unplugged, nice even coil ramps, nice crankshaft position sensor signal. So let's just fire it up, see what happens. Let's bump up or turn down the scale. Yep, we see nice coil ramps. There's our CKP signal. And I guess channel 2 is a ground. If we stop the recording, there it is. Okay, great. I'm going to bump the time scale up again. Let's rev it up. Plug in the alternator, see what changes. Car is barely running. And we'll shut it off. Okay. So where did we plug in the alternator here? It was running nice and smooth. See nice coil ramps right there. Did the crankshaft position sensor signal change at all? So we have 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 3. Doesn't look like it changed much. It just got weaker, for sure. 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 3. What happened to our engine computer? You can see the coil ramps are now boom, boom, and then kind of missing, or weak and weak. 1, 2, weak, weak. This is no good. Very, very neat. I like it. Like I said, crazy Subaru. What would cause this? One, two, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So you see the current here is reaching about 360 mil. So 1 volt is 10 amps, so it's peaking at maybe 4 amps. And the ripple there, that's something else in that circuit. But nice and even. As soon as we plug in the alternator, that current goes way down. Way down. Is it possible that the ground for the ignition coils is being affected? I mean, the computer's trying to fire them, it looks like. You know, there's still a little bit of a current ramp, but when the alternator kicks in, it might load that same ground that the ignition coils are using. Let's double check on our wiring diagram. Again, go to the ignition coils, right there. On top left of engine, GE1. Where is GE1? On top left of engine. A crusty ground somewhere. I see brand new fuel lines. This is a northeast car, so bad grounds are a possibility. We could go to one of the ignition coils and see, okay, there's a ground stud right there. Maybe that's top left of engine on the head. Brand new coils installed. Yeah, we need to get to, we can measure the ground on the engine block, I guess, but even if the block ground is okay, I mean, it cranks up fine. So the main ground cable here that goes down here to, should go right to the engine block, right to the starter. Yep, there it is. You guys see that? That's the main ground cable. So I need to get to one of these ignition coils and measure the ground at the coil itself. Okay, so I want to measure the ground on one of these coils, black and yellow wire, middle pin, pin 2. Coil number 2 seems to be the easiest to get to. So I got the connector off and I connected a piercing probe right in that black and yellow wire, and we're just going to use this extension lead. You know, this is still the ground. So the yellow lead, I'm going to connect to channel 4 now, right there. And on the scope you want to set up a voltage scale, let's say, you know, plus or minus, I don't expect to see more than a few volts on there, but it should be more than 0. So we roll the scope. Alright, so that's going to be our ground voltage. Let's unplug the alternator first. Get this car running again. Now the battery is getting discharged. I don't have a maintainer on it yet. Let's close that up. Hopefully this is going to be the money shot. Alright, here we go. Need the maintainer. TOPDON Tornado 90,000 to the rescue. Let's set it to 13.5. Only 21 amps. That's interesting. I wonder why it didn't crank. Let's try again. Maybe it's a poor engine ground. Okay, there we go. Now is the alternator plugged in. Alternator is unplugged. Okay, let's try it. Plug it in. Interesting. Alright, let's analyze the data. So we start up, alternator's unplugged. Unplugged right here, I plug the alternator in. Look at the ignition coil ramps. They just drop off a cliff. What happens right here? It's very repetitive too. It's like missing, missing, halfway there, good. Missing, missing, halfway there, good. It is running on 2 cylinders, you can tell. So it's not like all the coils are being affected. And the coil ground seems to be just fine. This is getting even more interesting now. Anything wrong with our crankshaft position sensor signal? Doesn't look like it. Wow, this is a crazy Subaru.